Today's audiobook is Tetch. No one likes queuing. You never meet a single person who says, "My favourite hobby is standing in queues all day long. Then, when I finally get to the front, I go straight to the back so I can queue all over again. Queues are boring. Queues are time-consuming. Queues make your feet ache, but they are necessary. You have to queue to get to a thing you want to do. Get on a bus, have your school dinner, get on a ride at a fair." British people are exceptionally good at queuing. Queuing was invented by a British lady, Duchess Queenie Q, in 1766. Her husband had just invented the toilet, as it was the only toilet in Britain at the time. There was a lot of people clamouring to use it. Everyone in Britain, in fact. There was nothing short of a stampede of people who needed to go. So the Duchess made everyone stand in line to take turns to use her husband's great invention. They would queue for one and only toilet in the country, stretched to the entire length of the British Isles. As soon as you had gone, it was sensible to go and join the end of the queue again, as by the time you reached the front, you would most likely need to go again. Now, everyone is expected to queue. However, there once was a man who refused to queue, Tetch. If he saw a queue for anything, even a queue of one person, which isn't really a queue until you join it, he would have an extreme reaction. His red hair would stand on end. His glasses would steam up, his legs would shake, his nostrils would flare, and his ears would flap so much you might think he was going to take off. Terry always embarrassed his two sons, Ted and Todd, by coming up with the most extraordinary excuses for why he should never queue. There was a long line at the local burger chain. Terry would tell the server, "I've been lost at sea. I haven't eaten anything for 3 years except seagull poop. Please, I beg you, let me get my chicken nuggets, chips and chocolate milkshake first." Everyone in the line would give 2 dirty looks as Terry dragged the twins to the front. When there was a crocodile of people waiting to enter the football stadium, Terry would shout, "I am England's new star striker. I know I am old and a bit podgy, but I am playing today. Let me through." Todd and Ted's face would blush bright red as their father elbowed his way to the front. Worst of all was when Terry was faced with a really long queue to get on the bus. "Let me through," he shouted, pulling the twins along and bargaining people out of the way. "This bus isn't going anywhere without me." "How is that so?" called out an elderly lady, struggling with her shopping trolley. "Because I have to sit at the back and pedal." Todd and Ted wished the ground would swallow them up. The twin brothers were turning 10, so their father asked them what they would like to do as a special birthday treat. "I promise to take you anywhere you like," he said. "Just name it. Anywhere at all." The twins looked at each other, and they both said in unison, "Loopyland!" "No!" cried Dad. Wilt Loopyland was an American billionaire who made cartoon films and had built the world's greatest theme park. He died as an old man years ago, but he'd had his head deep frozen so he could be brought back to life in the future. Now the future had arrived, and his head was attached to a robot body, and he was back running his Loopy empire. Wilt Loopy's most famous character was Loopy, the leopard. A leopard who was, you guessed it, Loopy. The character had been around for nearly 100 years and could be found on children's lunch boxes, pencil cases and underpants, often hollering his catchphrase, "Loopy, loopy, loo." So loved were all things Loopy. The children from all over the world dreamed of one day going to Loopyland. The only problem with Loopyland was the queues. The queues for the most popular rides were so long, they snaked for miles around the park. You could spend the entire day queuing for the Loopy coaster, or the Loopy log flume, or Little Loopy Land, and then the ride would be over in a matter of moments. The Loopy haunted house attraction lasted just 1 second. You walked in the front door. A teenager in Loopy the leopard costume shouted "boo" at you and then shoved you out through the back door. There was nowhere on earth that Terry Tetch would rather not be than Loopy Land. Loopy Land was a nightmare for someone who hated queues. But he had promised his boys. So, how could Terry take his twins to Loopy Land and not have to queue? The man needed a plan. Terry's great-great-great-aunt lived in the attic of the family home. Runt Ursula was a terrifying snake of a lady, forever hissing and baring her false fangs in the boys came too near. She was absolutely ancient. No one knew how old exactly. Not even her runt Ursula had a metal frame called a walker in case she ever went out. But she never did, preferring to bark orders at the Tetch family to do her bidding. Terry had a naughty idea. If only he could borrow the walker for the trip to Loopy Land. Then he could pretend he couldn't stand well enough to wait in line. The staff at Loopy Land would let him go straight to the front of the queue for every single ride. The plan was so simple, it was so brilliant. There was one big problem. How would Terry get his hands on his great-great-aunt's walker? There was no way the old snake would let him have it. Even though she lived in the attic of his home, she loathed her great-great-nephew. Terry decided a dawn ride was the best plan. So on the day of the trip to Loopy Land, Terry crept upstairs to the attic and, without a sound, opened the door. Zzz, zzz, zzz. Runt Ursula was snoring away. Her false teeth, or rather fangs, were stuck in a glass of water on her bedside table, and her walker squatted next to it. Terry tiptoed over to the walker, picked it up and swung it over the bed. As he did so, one of the walker's 4 metal legs clunked to the glass of the water containing the old snake's false fangs. "No!" shouted Terry as the glass of water and false fangs hit the floor. Tink splosh doof! The fangs clattered across the floorboards as if they were alive. Clatter, clatter, clatter. The noise woke up Runt Ursula with a start. She opened one beady eye, then another. "What are you doing with my walker, you nasty little squirt?" she bawled. Through her words sounded a bit muffled as she didn't have her false fangs in. Just borrowing it, Runt Ursula," Terry replied, dashing to the door with the walker. Stupidly, he was holding the walker widthways, so it smashed into the doorframe. Twunk! It allowed just enough time for the old snake to slide out of bed and onto the floor. Then she scooped up her escaping false fangs with her long, bony fingers and pushed them into her mouth. "Sssss," she hissed. Next, she slithered across the floor on her tummy and dug her fangs into her great-great-nephew's ankle. "Ah!" screamed Terry. He speedily spun the walker round and charged down the stairs. Stomp, stomp, stomp. Runt Ursula was still biting her ankle, and she was not letting go. She slid down the staircase behind him. Slunk, slunk, slunk. All the time sinking her fangs deeper and deeper into Terry's flesh. On hearing their father scream, Ted and Todd leaped out of their bunk beds. "Dad!" yelled Ted. "What's going on?" shouted Todd. "Get into the car," ordered their father. "But," they replied, "we are still in our pajamas." "I said, get in the car." The boys did as they were told. They hurtled down the stairs, hurried out of the front door and bundled themselves into the back of the car. Meanwhile, Runt Ursula was slowing Terry down to a stop. As much as he tried to shake her off, the old snake just wouldn't let go. There was only one thing for it. Terry leaned down and tickled his great-great-aunt under her chin. She half laughed, half screamed, opening her mouth. "Ha!" leaving her fangs still biting into his ankle. Terry made a dash for it, slamming the front door. Shunt! Still holding the walker, he tried to force it through the door, but it was too wide, and it just wouldn't go. Kerplunk, kerchonk, kerrunk. Thinking fast, he whipped the belt off his dressing gown and lashed the walker to the roof of the car. Then he leaped into the driver's seat and started the engine. "Loopy lamp, here we come!" he shouted over the noise. When the plane, with the walker strapped to the roof, finally landed in America, Terry stopped off at the first shop at the airport. Then he bought a tin of talcum powder and a black pen. "What do you need those for, Dad?" said Ted, still in his pyjamas. "Just you watched." Then he proceeded to tip the whole tin of talcum powder over his head. Woomph! A huge white cloud exploded into the airport, which made the boys cough and splutter. "What on earth are you doing?" demanded Todd, also still in his pyjamas. "I haven't finished yet," replied Terry, proceeding to draw lines on his face with the pen. "Have you gone nuts, Dad?" said Ted, not unreasonably. "Far from it," replied the man, with a mischievous grin. "And don't call me Dad any more. Call me Grandad. In fact, call me Granddad. Call me Great-Granddad. Watch." With that, Dad grabbed the walker and shuffled along the airport walkway. Shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. He was pretending to be a very, very, very old man, complete with white hair and thick lines all over his face. "This way! We won't have to queue for a single ride at Loopyland." "But we don't mind queuing, do we, Todd?" asked Ted. "No, everyone else has to, so why shouldn't we?" agreed Todd. "Because I cannot queue," yelled Terry Tetch. He was so loud that everyone in the airport looked around, realizing his mistake. Terry instantly went back to being the boy's great-grandfather and shuffled off towards the exit. Shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. "I've got a bad feeling about this," remarked Ted. "Me too," added Todd. A short while later, the three found themselves outside the toll gates to the world's greatest theme park, Loopyland. Ted and Todd could barely contain their excitement. The boys were literally jumping and up and down with joy. Of course, their father was doing no such thing. Instead, he was holding tightly onto the walker and shuffling along slowly towards the ticket office, past the mile-long line of folks queuing to buy their tickets. "Hello," began Terry, even putting on an old wobbly voice to go with his supposed old wobbly legs. Please, can you help me?" he asked the ticket seller. "I am 101 years old." "So?" asked the bored bubblegum-blowing teenager behind the window. "So I am very old and don't walk too good. That's why I have this old thing," he said, rattling his walker. "Rittle, rattle, rattle. And young man, I definitely 100%, without any doubt whatsoever, cannot queue. Not even for a second. Do you hear me? Not 1 second." The ticket seller rolled his eyes and reached for the metal box. "Here you are, Grandpa," he said, as he slid 3 gold passes under the window. "Yes, no queuing!" exclaimed Terry, jumping up and down. And as he did so, a fog of talcum powder clouded the air. "What's that?" asked the ticket seller. It's, well," he spluttered, "Dad was in trouble." The impossibly long queue of folks waiting began eyeballing him suspiciously. "Dandruff," cried Terry, thinking fast. "That's a heck of a lot of dandruff. Welcome to Loopyland," said the ticket seller. Next gold passes meant they could go straight to the front of any queue in the whole of Loopyland. The most popular attraction there was the loop-the-loop of Loop-the-Loop. The loop-the-loop, the loop-the-loop, the loop-the-loop, the loopy coaster. This was a roller coaster that looped the loop an incredible 10 times in a row. The line for the roller coaster snaked the many miles all around the park. It took days, weeks, months, and sometimes years to have your turn. The good news was that sometimes children who were too short to be allowed on the ride when they joined the queue had grown tall enough in the intervening times. So, after a huge lump of loopy burgers, loopy fries, and loopy shake, the Tetch family made their way to the roller coaster. "I'm not sure about this," hissed Ted. "It's the longest line I've ever seen, Dad," added Todd. "People are going to hate us, Dad." "Shh," shushed their father. "It's great-grandfather, remember? Trust me, we will go straight to the front." The two boys shook their heads as they followed their father to the front of the queue, Terry shuffling on Aunt Ursula's walker all the way. Shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. The old snake's false fangs were still locked onto his ankle. Those families who had been waiting to ride the roller coaster for an eternity, some holding babies that had been born during the time their parents had queued, fumed as they see the three push past them. "Hey, who do you think you are? Get back to the line." Come on along, my great-grandsons," called Terry in his best wobbly voice. Ted and Todd looked at each other nervously and walked through the gates to the ride. Instantly, they were seated in the front row of the loopy coaster. Terry had the smuggest of smug grins on his face as the carriages chugged up with the impossibly steep slope that seemed to stretch all the way to the sky. This was the calm before the storm. The storm came. As soon as the peak had been reached, the carriages careered down at terrific speed. Zoom! They looped their first loop. Ted and Todd noticed that their father's face was beginning to turn green. The loopy burger, those loopy fries, and that loopy shake was coming back from an encore. Loop! As each loop passed, Terry Tetch's face became greener and greener. At first it was light green, then dark green, then becoming parrot green. The next thing he knew, their father's face had turned putrid green. No, a luminous green, a day-glow green, a fluorescent green, before settling on a vomit green. This meant only one thing. Their father had to spew. And spew he did. Because of the G-force of travelling so fast upside down, the chunder thunder came out of his mouth, hurled and splurred right back in his face. Splat! As the final loop looped, Terry Tetch found himself covered from head to toe in his own yak attack. At least the roller coaster came to an abrupt halt. Shut on! Ted and Todd helped their poor father off the ride. The man couldn't see a thing and rubbed his head off with his sleeve. Wipe. At once, the old age lines from a pen came off as he did. Of course, all that talcum powder with which he covered his hair. The 101-year-old man had been unmasked in the front of the entire queue of the loopy coaster. "He's a faker! He's no old dude! He jumped the queue!" The angry shouts came thick and fast. I am great-grandpa," protested Terry. "Liar! Cheat! Phony!" Looking at the angry mob circling, Terry shouted, "Run!" Run he did. His boys trailing close behind. There was no time to grab Aunt Ursula's walker, which was left discarded by the side of the roller coaster. He never even needed that thing. What a piece of work! Get him! In no time, the entire queue of people for the Loopy coaster was chasing the Tetch family. The three ran straight into a huge Loopyland musical parade. The great Wilt Loopy himself was at the front, his old head on his new robot body, with all his cartoon animal chums following on behind, singing the Loopyland song. We love Loopyland, Loopyland we love. If you don't love Loopyland, off you can shove. There was the Loopyland leopard, of course, Barmy the baboon, Wacky the walrus, Nutty the newt, Crackers the crocodile, and Wombat the wombat. As Terry Tetch barged through the parade, he did the unthinkable. He knocked over Wilt Loopy. Thud! Ah! Yelped the billionaire as his old head became detached from his new robot body and rolled off, thundel. As Terry and his sons raced away, the detached head shouted, Cartoon animals of Loopyland! After them! Dad, I can't run anymore. I've got a stitch, called Ted, clutching his tummy. And I've got wobbly legs, complained Todd. Ahead was the Loopyland Loopy Mobile. Terry pulled the driver out and jumped in. Come on, boys, he shouted, and Ted and Todd leaped in the back as the Loopy Mobile raced off. The cartoon animals caught up and pounced on it. Loopy, the leopard, was on the bonnet. Barmy, the baboon, was on the roof. Wacky, the walrus, was on the windscreen. Nutty, the newt, was on the boot. Crackers, the crocodile, was clinging onto the door, and Wombat, the wombat, was on the back window. Terry drove the Loopy-mobile as fast as he could, swerving into ice cream vans and toy stands to try and shake them off. Crash, bang, wallop. Only Loopy the leopard remained. The cartoon animal crawled around into the footwell of the buggy. Get off, shouted Terry. But Loopy the leopard went to grab the man's ankle to stop him pushing down on the accelerator pedal. As he did so, Loopy pressed hard on Runt Ursula's false fangs that were still locked on Terry's flesh. Oh! Terry screamed. His foot came off the accelerator pedal, and the Loopy-mobile lurched to a halt. Ted turned to Todd. We are in big trouble. The biggest, replied Todd to Ted. Wombat, the wombat, had picked up Wilt Loopy's head and brought it over to them. The old man had gone scarlet with fury. Think you don't need to queue, do you? I am going to teach you a lesson you will never forget. The cartoon animals grabbed the Tetch family and marched them through Loopyland as the crowds of visitors all jeered. Boo! Loopyland fans called out Wilt Loopy's detached head. I need your help. I need you all to form a longest queue you can for the Loopy coaster. There's a Loopyland pencil for everyone who does, completely free. Instantly, everyone did what the kindly billionaire's head asked. That's $1 billion, said the head. Now, take the man to get to the back of it. Terry was sweating and shaking as the cartoon animals dragged him to the back of the queue. As he was placed there, his hair stood up on end, his glasses steamed up, his nostrils flared, his legs shook and his ears flapped so much he actually lifted off the ground. Whoosh! Terry was shaking so much that the old snake's false fangs fell off his ankle. Clatter! What are those? Asked Wilt Loopy's head. My great Runt Ursula's, replied Terry. Well, the poor old dear must be needing them back. I bet she is a kindly soul. Pick them up, please, somebody. I would, but I have no hands, arms, or indeed, body. I will call the Runt Ursula such a pretty name and reunite her with her teeth. Now, your boys have done nothing wrong. Their only crime is having a terrible father. Boys, you can have a free lumpy nugget. Ted and Todd smiled. Thank you. Just one loopy nugget to share, continued Wilt Loopy's head, before returning his gaze to Terry. You, will be made to stand and wait for the longest time anyone has ever waited for anything. So Terry waited and waited and waited. His ears flapped so much that he had to be tied to the ground to stop him from flying off. His glasses cracked, and he waited some more. What seemed like a lifetime passed before Terry was finally at the front of the queue and ready to take his seat on the loopy coaster. The safety bar came down, pinning him to his seat, and the loopy coaster began its slow ascent to the sky. Terry turned his head to see who was sitting next to him. Horror upon horror. It was Runt Ursula. The old snake turned to him, opened her mouth, and bared her fangs. "Revenge!" she hissed as she leaned over to take a bite. "No!" screamed Terry.